you for your introduction. I would make a joke saying that person isn't here today, so I'll have to take her place, but it's not exactly appropriate at the moment. So. All right. Can't we do something about this hot lights, including the key light? Or I'll put my sunglasses on. Maybe I'll do that. That's better. Anyway, I want you to look there, not here. So I've tried to present a taxonomic way of looking at my own work. The problem is I don't actually fit in those categories, and so I wind up repeating what fits in what category. So you'll be saying what that again. So here goes. I have, as you heard, done a fair bit of work involved in photography and media, but also critiques of representation, which I will probably show you none of. The main work of criticality is an old one, which is the Bowery, which I think the only image I left in this talk is down at the bottom. It's a photo text work designed to be displayed in museums, unlike most of my work at that time that addresses photographic representation and power, particularly in relation to documentary of people of a class lower than that of the photographer in the audience. That's not visible in the photos. In fact, there are no people visible, but it's beside the point. Okay, then there are all these montages, and I have to say that that one on the extreme left is supposed to be orange, so that should give you some idea of the color shifts here. This is, as I was saying, some rather straightforward, I don't know what to say about the Cuba documentary. If I stop dithering like this, I'll probably wind up being able to show you some of the pictures, and then maybe I'll talk a little more about it. A lot of my work is concerned with systems of transport, as it says, and I won't show any of it. I've left out most of the photography because I often feel faint when I see what color photography looks like when projected. So this is just a small selection, pixelated, slightly off color, etc., she said resentfully. Photo audio, this is a work called She Sees in Herself a New Woman Every Day, which is about literally images of women's feet in outdated shoes, because at the time I made the work in the mid-70s, women's pictures of shoes, which are, of course, a commodity sale item, are always shown facing you because, of course, it's never the woman taking pictures of her own feet because she's merely the foot model, blah, blah, blah. But it's also a metaphor, standing on your own 2 feet, for independence. So there's an audio of a woman having an imaginary conversation with her mother about the way in which mothers pass along attitudes of dependence to their daughters in order to make them more acceptable. The lower one is a series of maps and vectors for a show that I, sort of a retrospective in GOM Torino. It's called Invisible Labor, and it consists of audio interviews with young prostitutes from Nigeria who were trafficked, imagining they were going to Italy to get jobs and were forced to be prostitutes at the margins of town. The Italian and other white-skinned prostitutes are in the center of town, but these women are forced to be along the margins. And the women that I spoke to, there were also 2 men who were trafficked for non-prostitution reasons, had all left prostitution, thanks to the auspices of 2 agencies, but I asked them a series of questions. Then they answered the questions. They were translated into Italian and read by actors because I wanted to move away from the kind of excessive personalization of hearing people speaking a language other than their own. Actually, they were mostly in Italian. They were regularized. And I, at the opening forum, a number of the women spoke, as did the women representing the agencies that helped them transition out. The point being that this really is invisible labor in Italy. There's a lot of talk about migrants, but very little talk about them as people and what jobs they wind up doing or not doing, and who does what in which cities. Bowery highlights is the upper left and the right. It's another work about the Bowery, which is a signal Skid Row, now gentrified street in New York City. But this is a work about real estate and gentrification, and it's not about representation per se. Housing architecture and the built environment. I also won't show works from that project, which keeps returning and returning and returning to my life for reasons I'm not sure about. But I did a project on, as it says, housing architecture and the built environment in 1989 at the Dia Art Foundation, which involved organizing people who were artists, filmmakers, photographers, poets, activists, advocacy groups, and others to make presentations, that is, visual presentations, including video, in 3 shows called Homefront, Homeless, and City Visions and Revisions, to talk about what produces conditions of eviction and homelessness, and how communities on the one hand organize, and on the other hand professional communities try to re-envision ways of making cities livable without the dispossession of the poor. Excuse me. A topic that returns and is worse now than even when I did it in 1989. I'm going to be, I'm sorry, to add to pressures. My voice is going to probably start wavering because of allergies, and I'll sound really strange, so take a minute. These 2 on the right are both video about city streets and housing. There is no image right here at the moment about the Unité. I've done a lot of installation works that are site-specific. Greenpoint, a place no one ever heard of until now. I don't mean that you've heard of it, but it's the overflow community for Williamsburg, which is the gentrified community in Brooklyn. I've lived there since 1987. I fled Dumbo when it was gentrifying. These are communities in North Brooklyn. And it's been interesting to watch what's happening in Greenpoint as the tide of middle-class people follows me in the traditional setup of artists going to communities where they're different from the residents who are longer-term inhabitants, try to blend in, try to just live and work, wind up in numbers, developers go, and then wind up building luxury residences that then drive out the artists. This is now, was not so well codified in 1989 when I did the project If You Lived Here, but is very clear now, and led to the book Culture Class, which is just a tiny little book. And the essays are available online through eFlux. It's just a little book. talking about precisely that. I've also done tours about histories of communities. All of these will recur in later of these screens. That's why I said you'll get bored saying that again. This is Singapore, which I'll talk about later. More installations, garage sales, fascination with the game of the exploding historical hollow leg, which makes no sense in English, let alone any other language, but it is about war, particularly nuclear war, and of course, the phallic impulse is represented in the title, if not directly in the work. Global Taste, which is about the tide of global culture, particularly through the English language. And the fact that I'm standing here speaking our current version of Latin and that you, I hope, understand me shows that what I was talking about in 1985 has since been instantiated, luckily for me. So that's the first version, the later version, and back to the current version. That's from an installation at MoMA, which is up now very badly. Garage sales and other work that's followed me for decades. I'm not sure why, but I'll talk about it and why. Live performances of various types with me as the central character, just like now. More live performances about, it happens to be feijoada, which is a dish not of your national cuisine, and yet up there. And the way that food is represented in relationship to tourism, commodification, and culture, and the position of women in the presentation of that which delights. Semiotics of the Kitchen and Audition, which is based on a video that I did, which was definitely not a live performance, in 75, dated 75, done in 74, and a recreation of it in London as a group performance. Romances of the Meal, which is largely about coffee, Coca-Cola, and other brown liquids other than tea, circulating commodities, but also BSE disease, was the year 2000, done as a performance in which the audience is served coffee, Coca-Cola, chocolate, and at the end, the curator was pied because pieing of people, don't do it, was born as a tradition in Brussels. So it followed along the meal. This is If You Lived Here, and the traveling exposition related to If You Lived Here, which is the homelessness housing exhibition I mentioned. Something impossible to actually show as slides, and therefore I'm showing you as many slides as I could fit on a screen, because when I can't show something, I show as much of it as possible. It's a series, it actually makes sense when you're there. It's a series of translucent sheets with quotations from the philosopher Hannah Arendt for her centenary exhibition in the former Jewish girls' school on Auguststrasse in Berlin. And it's called Reading Hannah Arendt Politically by an American in the 21st Century. And it was particularly, they were all from her books on totalitarianism, and they all applied clearly and directly to the conduct of the United States, and particularly what we call the Bush regime, with very little reason to make any adjustments in her comments. Arendt wrote primarily in English in her later years because she was a refugee and moved to the New School. She was a public intellectual, but her texts were also in German, but she oversaw and sometimes wrote and revised that version, so it appears in both German and English, and they don't always quite correspond. And everything is at a slight angle. remember this quote. Practically speaking, the totalitarian ruler proceeds like a man who persistently insults another, and then, paraphrasing, and then he then steps on the other guy's foot, which he claims is a result of the insult. It's actually worse than that, but, you know, it's a common political trope. You demonize somebody and then you wipe them out and claim it's because of the insult to you. Various installations. I think we've seen this one already. The tours. Liverpool, Hamburg, and the Frieze Art Fair, which is not about history but about labor. Having spent quite a bit of time in Germany, I wound up, well, the top one is about U.S. history and the execution of people accused of being atom spies. This is a life-size picture of a woman named Ethel Rosenberg, and I will not say any more about it because it's too hard to explain. But I did a number of works about German history in Münster, in Frankfurt, and in Kassel. This show ended at the end of May, and I will say more about it because live artists like to talk about current or recent works, so. Feminism is only there as a separate panel because otherwise I have to constantly remind people that I am a feminist, was a feminist, and will continue to be a feminist, and that I consider that even in works that are not explicitly engaged with questions of gender politics, the work is produced from the standpoint of a feminist. It's strange to have to actually proclaim allegiance to that kind of thing, and yet. Similarly, though not quite on the same scale, for reasons of being a citizen of an imperial power in a war-inclined century, and then another century, I have had to, or felt impelled to do a lot of work about war and in opposition to war, of course. I put a few in here, I won't say any more about them, but this one from '72 shows a tactic of mine that has persisted in many ways, which is to show outdated or recently outdated clothing of women. That is that which we can say is the not me, and yet it's reminiscent of the me, which both represents us, but represents the not us, that is, in this case, peasants in pajamas, quote unquote, that is, Vietnamese peasants, doing a lot of popping. So the names, ages, or date of birth and prisoner number of women prisoners in the South Vietnamese prison are rather crudely displayed in an installation. Sometimes this was displayed outdoors, like a clothesline. These were my son's, it's outdated, used, but clean, diapers. Yes, but the language on the diapers represents what has been washed off the diapers in reality, and it is excuses for invading Vietnam and killing the people, who are referred to as gooks, which is a completely unacceptable term. Yeah. This is also B-52 and Baby Tears. Baby Tears is not that translatable. It's a pun in English, baby's tears, but it's Helxine solirola. It's a certain type of plant which undoubtedly grows here because it's semi-tropical. I'm sure it's very familiar. It's like a weed in effect. It grows and cracks. This B-52, of course, is the signature bomber of the United States, dropping more ordnance on Vietnam than in previous history anywhere at any time, and also on Cambodia and Laos. Still in use. Bomber. More recent work based on a device which sort of represents a linguistic mediator between peoples. So the device is programmed, let's say it's programmed in Dari or Pashto. The soldier usually picks a phrase, and then the machine speaks it. It's like on Star Wars or Doctor Who. So I like to reproduce certain technologies in cardboard models. In this case, I reproduced the phrasalator. It's a real, as I said, this is real. It's actually in use. It's also in use by emergency services, they say, and so on. If you spoke into it with certain pre-programmed phrases, it would repeat them in Arabic and in German, but we didn't do the German. It was just there as a reminder. So if you said one of those, it would say it in Arabic. The German was not just because Americans loved to use the Nazis as a baseline for hatred, but because it actually was shown in Berlin. So just want to say that. This was something, my son, who's actually in Hamburg right now, being a visiting artist, is a cartoonist, so we had one day to do something for a book against war, somewhere back in the 2007, I'm not sure. So I wrote something on gardening in Guantanamo, and gardening in Iraq, by soldiers, both of which were not acceptable. And so my son drew, he said, okay, we've got one day. I don't know if you know anything about production of comic books, but if you do, if you know that if you're not doing it by computer, it actually takes a long time. So, and also about gardening in other situations of war. In Guantanamo, it happened to be Uyghur who were declared stateless. But anyway, this is, I was asked to contribute a recipe to Beaux-Arts magazine in France, and I did patriotic Jell-O salad, by the way. Happy Independence Day for Americans. Today is July 4th. This is patriotic Jell-O salad. I got the recipe from the internet. I love to take recipes from the internet and use them in projects because they're often quite startling. And I just made some substitutions. But the idea being red, white, and blue are flag colors. After we cut it open for the photo display recipe, I threw the Jell-O. I know you have Jell-O. I saw it in the Jumbo yesterday. Threw it in the back garden, and a year later it was still there, and I thought, yeah. So I had to throw it away because the idea that someone would eat this stuff is just terrifying. This was complete audio piece with lights. We torture people with sound in Guantanamo and elsewhere. So, and the soldiers who choose the soundtrack of torture are like kids, so they have various advertising, like meow, 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 the meow mix cartoon, commercial and all kinds of, but also heavy metal. But not death metal, which is supposedly anti-war, but I chose it because I knew my audience wouldn't know the difference. So every once in a while, this dark gallery would light up very brightly, and death metal, it's cheap. But this one was a computer field. It's invisible. The space was divided into grids. If you crossed it, you might hear a bomb, dishes crashing, a car crash, camels laughing, or other percussive sounds. So what drew you to want to cross it is that tiny little things were written on the wall, which were the number of casualties on the US side and on the Iraqi side at the time. Oh, it's 2008. Like I said, cheap but effective. This is the opposite. It's completely visual. I was asked to do a piece, a work for the Look 3 Festival of Photograph 1 year ago in Charlottesville, Virginia. It was called the Free Speech Wall. It's next to City Hall and the main auditorium venue. And I discovered that Charlottesville, Virginia, which is the home of the University of Virginia, which was founded by Thomas Jefferson, one of the primary intellectuals and architects of the United States of America, and the man who began the University of Virginia. Charlottesville was the first city in the US to ban drones, and was also the home of anti-drone advocacy and activism on the part of two different groups. So I thought it was, so I asked the organizers, do people in Charlottesville know about this? Well, no, not really. So I thought it was appropriate, and I'll say more about it later if I get there. Various forms of media, from mail and video, both of which, of course, were designed to circulate outside art venues. That may be hard to believe now, since video has eaten the entire art audience, but whatever. I guess we're back to painting. I don't want to say more about this because then I'll never get to the other stuff, but one of these was in Spanish. I was living in San Diego, where all the household employees, indoor and out, were from Mexico, but everybody hated Mexicans, which was very confusing for someone moving there from New York. The entire household workforce and a good portion of the industrial workforce and the people who grow the flowers, which now come from Colombia, are Mexican, but you hate your own workforce? I don't get it. I didn't get it. So I used a book called Homemade Spanish, How to Talk to Your Maid Without Actually Knowing Any Spanish, and I produced one of these postcard novels, How to Make a Peanut Butter and Jelly Sandwich, and so on. And then these. This is impossible to show, and I don't have time to log on online, though I could. So as usual, I put in too many images because but you can look it up, actually. It's still there. A lot of the links have changed because this is from '08, but it's about confinement, the confinement of the professional middle class workforce in offices and cubicles, and the confinement of prisoners in Guantanamo. And we have huge numbers of people in solitary confinement in the US. We have more people in jail proportionally than anywhere else in the Western world. Sorry about this, I'm not weeping. Okay, so this, of course, can't be shown, so of course I'm showing it. These are some of the drones. All these things are moving. And this is about our test case of a guy named Padilla called the Dirty Bomber, who was a gang member from Chicago who was arrested on a plane for having had some communications about a dirty bomb that he never in any way attempted to produce, and he was held, he's in jail forever, but they used him as a psychological test case. We'll put someone in solitary and see what happens to them, and he was broken as a person. This also is all singing, all dancing, and it's about, of course, what to do when you're trapped in your hotel room, prisoners, and I don't know if you know about this, but prisoners, I forget which Philippine city, they perform American songs for their exercise. It's not clear whether they do this because they want to or they are sort of coerced, but it's still available online. You can watch this under Byron F. Garcia. Anyway, yes, I'm going to stop and move on. Billboards with my son and without. I thought you might. I gather that this outraged the art community in Berlin. Of course, they didn't tell me that to my face, but I've since read about it. It's not art. Let me think about this. Okay, anyway. So that's my thought about billboards is, what does it mean to make an art billboard? Should it have blue sky with clouds, as I've seen several art billboards? I mean, what's the point? So the passing public, if it even looks, thinks, it's going to say diesel or something on that next week, or, whatever. So, sorry about the colors. I put this here because I feel guilty about not otherwise showing or talking about video. So it's a bunch of pictures flashing by you. That's what I do. I flash pictures by you. I apologize. So I was invited, so now this is the actual talk. It begins now. I was invited to show work at the CCA Warsaw Zamek. You can tell I'm jet lagged. I can't do it. Ujazdowskie. I apologize to the gods of Polish language, sorry. Rather than just showing works, which we assembled a lot of works, the curator the primary curator was a woman, and she wanted a lot of feminist works, and the male curator wanted anti-war works. Here it's both together, Isabel, which is a little more understanding, I think. So there were a lot of works, most of the video, and a work about Greenpoint, which is about Polish, Ujazdowski. But my heart was in a project that I did there, which was a series of public, or as we call them in the U.S., town hall meetings, where speakers speak for a few minutes, and then everybody can participate. And so there were 9 of them. Gender, or how to be a woman in the New Poland, housing, or how to get an apartment in the New Poland, labor, or how to get a job, debt, or how to get out of it, artists, how to be an artist, environment and industry, which was called How to Succeed Through Coal, because it's the most polluting extractive environment in Europe, industry. Immigration, which was about flows of Poles out and in, and other people in. What should we put in the new Jewish museum, which was just built and is just open in May, I believe. And should there be a Polish colony on Mars, which is, and each of them had a kiosk, which was an actual item. The labor was a checkout counter, and you'll see some of them, I'll show you. This is the hall, they're all in there. That's housing up there, anyway. That's Kaya, the curator. Kaya Pavelek. That's art, it's a crate. Det on the right. This is the gender panel with the panelists, and one of whom is Poland has a transgender MP, and her name is slipping my mind. Anna Gradowska on the right. The people who were attending were given booklets and pens to write questions and remarks, which were spoken, handed forward, posted on the wall, whatever the person wished. This is the panel on migration. This is what should we put in the new Jewish museum, which is really about Jewish identity in Poland, the same way Polish colony on Mars is about Polish identity. That's coal on the left. This is the environment. Housing and the Polish colony. These are all the kiosks. I didn't show all of them. Labor was, as I said, a checkout counter and so on. Something completely different, which is also involves hordes of people, but not as invited audience participants, but rather co-workers. I'm going to quickly say I was invited to send my traveling library to the Singapore Biennale, which was called Open House, and I said the library was tired and had gone home, but that I would like to do a project with women in Singapore. And I was put in touch with, we had record snowstorms that winter, so I'm sitting in a cafe in Brooklyn with the snow up to here, writing to people in Singapore where it's hot, and inviting people whom I didn't know to participate in a production of a public garden at a famous disused airport as part of the Singapore Biennale. One of the first women I contacted said, "Only women?" And I said, "Why, you got some guy you work with?" She said, "Yes, I do." So I said, okay, women and men. So it was mostly women, but also men. There was no, whatever distinction. It's impossible to show the site, so I show a number of different pictures. That's modern Singapore in the background. That's this teardrop garden in front of this wonderful old airport. You can see its lovely modernist building at the back. This is people working on my project, actually. And the teardrop shape, it's much bigger than it looks. These are some of the projects that people wound up doing. These are some of the meetings, some of the participants. The guy on the left, Nature Society. The person to his right is an artist. That person who's next represents the actual labor force, which I will get to very briefly. And the woman and the man, he represents the Parks Department. What I learned about this absolutely grotesquely neoliberal culture in Singapore is that the government does nothing. Every single thing is subcontracted, which leads to unbelievable labor abuses, which I hope you will avoid, where people are brought in from other countries who are untrained, unprotected, have zero labor laws protecting them. And that's that guy on the left. So Mohammed Azmi, he said, I'll give you some contractors to call. She represents Prince's. He is the people who actually do the work at Prince's. These are some of the student workers. Look how white I look, dead, dead, dead. Oh, my God, it's scary. So these are students who were student art teacher candidates who were participants along with their professors in the show. These are the migrant workers, the household workers with their production. These were the lucky ones who actually get a day off. They are part of associations for the protection of migrants. These are people working on projects I won't talk about. These are the guys doing the physical labor, aside from the digging, which was mostly done by the groups who participated. This is a medicine garden and a map of Singapore with the trees planted, about to be planted. And you can see the trees are probably this high, so that's a little bit of the scale, but all the neighborhoods named after trees which are no longer there. Because Singapore, which has as its metaphor a garden state, and Lee Kuan Yew, who founded it and still has an iron grip on it, is called the master gardener. So everybody understood that this was a metaphoric project as well, that it involves erasing what's there in favor of replacing it with something else. And these are all the people who participated in this project directly. Am I talking too long? This is the Charlottesville Project Theater of Drones. These are vinyl posters. I think it's 90 feet of posters, whatever that is in meters, 30. These are a few of the smallest drones. All the drones that are represented along the bottom are actually extant drones. This is a quote from my and many people's favorite science fiction writer, I'm a science fiction addict, Philip K. Dick, from 1960, which is about drones. Well, one thing it's about. He was a paranoid, drug-taking maniac. Therefore, everything that he wrote has become prophetic or very closely representative. So this is impossible to look at, so I just, they're controlled in Nevada, 7,000 miles from the theater of operations, by guys who wind up getting post-traumatic stress disorder, not because they think they're playing video games, but because they spent weeks to months closely surveilling individuals and families and then killing them. So it's a return to a kind of literal instantiation by virtue of the close representation of the people whom you wind up killing, which makes it actually different from bombing. I'm sure they'll solve this problem eventually, but and this is about internal surveillance via drones. Amazon is promising to deliver books by drones, Pizza Hut to deliver pizzas by drones, but really what you get is surveillance and lethal so far. They don't care if the guy next to them has been shot. Will they do a better job than humans? Yes. About the production of terrorists by our drone campaign. I don't expect you to read these. It's just, I'm trying to impress on you that I really did research, and that if you, should you care to, you could read the figures or find them. And at my talk, I invited the two people representing the Roots Action guy and John Whitehead, who were in, David Swanson represents activists against drone warfare, John Whitehead against drone surveillance, and he's the author who wrote the anti-drone legislation that's been adopted there and elsewhere in the US. Okay, this will require no discussion except that in 73, when I moved to San Diego from an island off the coast of the US on which Brooklyn sits, where I was born, I was struck by the fact that people sell their stuff on their front lawns to other people, which no New Yorker at the time would ever have dreamed of doing, because you lose dignity, because you're exposing the fact that you want money to people, because you're selling them stuff you clearly no longer want, and because you're exposing your taste to the opinions of others. So as a little anthropologist amateur, I was quite amazed and became very interested in the garage sale phenomenon, and I quickly realized that it's especially in 73, which was the year of the oil shock, it's a way of remaining au courant in the cycle of commodity production, but it's also a liminal space for women to engage with their neighbors and in every possible way, talk with them, exchange with them, and bond with them in suburban locales where it's often very difficult to be friends with your neighbors. So I did a garage sale in an art gallery because I was really interested in the different forms of valuation of commodities for sale within. I was attacked by a student of Herbert Marcuse. She was a good friend of mine. We were both graduate students in San Diego, because this was, in effect, the violation of the sanctity of the art gallery, which is a Hegelian notion at the heart of modernism, which this work was specifically pitched against. So I'd say, what would you like me to sell in an art gallery? Because that was the taboo subject, that things in galleries have commodity, and museums have commodity values attached to them. One could still say in 1973 that this was not a fit subject. I say this for a reason. So then I was invited to have a show in San Francisco, and I just said I'll do a garage sale in the garage of the La Mamelle Gallery there, and that was it. End of garage sale, until I started having a retrospective that was traveling at the end of the 90s and the turn of the millennium. And curators wanted to show the garage sale. Well, actually, this is San Diego and San Francisco, I forgot. Suzanne Lacey, front and center, me. I won't talk about this. Oh, there's a text that's playing audibly and old slides. Maybe the garage sale is a metaphor for the mind. Actually, the text is straight out of Marx, or mostly, about the fetishization of commodities, and but also, okay. So then I wound up doing it this often. I hate this show. It's so much work. And I hate the idea that I have to sell things to people or refuse to sell them to people while trying to keep a smile on my face while people are talking to me about extraneous things. It's just so stressful and so much work. But shopping has proceeded to lodge itself at the heart of the museum and gallery world. And every time a curator has proposed it, there's been a good reason. And this time, this show's over. I will never do it again. As soon as it was over, Nuit Blanche in France, in Paris, asked me to do it. And I said, no. it's a lot of work. But I also love seeing people being happy. So I won't talk about this one because it's more complicated. But I began taking pictures of people with their purchases. That was Stockholm, this is Dublin, London. This is still London. Art Basel, why would you have a garage sale at Art Basel? Martha, exactly, okay. But that's what it's all about, okay. And the one in the atrium of the Museum of Modern Art, which definitely was its apotheosis. That is an immense flag. Excuse me, it's really hard to see how big that flag is. And I did public collections. And I may end just by showing you some of these. It was called the Meta Monumental Garage Sale. I know meta means something else in Portuguese, but it also means meta. We're in a university setting. Did not buy the baby. They bought the car. Biodiesel. And the 2 newspapers that we produced, which MoMA hated. I'll just quickly show these and then I'll lie down. Okay, so I took photos in Cuba just at the moment after the Mariel boat lift with all these Cubans fleeing in boats and rafts to the US, and just between the election of Ronald Reagan and his inauguration, I went with Ana Mendieta, Lucy Lepard, and a number of other people. And we toured for a couple of weeks. I took pictures and never intended to show them ever. And my gallerist asked me, why don't you show those pictures? And I said, come on, Jay. Photos of Cuba from 1981, no one wants to see them. So he talked me into it after, from 93 till a couple of years ago. Finally, I said, sure, why not? So these are just a few representative. Of course, as a photographer myself, I couldn't resist taking a picture of the itinerant photographer getting a shoe shine. You know, people not looking at us and people looking at us. Second Congress of the party. I know you can read that. Religious literature. I wound up with a lot of pictures of women working and men not working. It's really quite astonishing. But these are kids, I don't mean them. Okay, so I have to show these for you. So I'm just going to run through them. There's nothing to say. These are from the mid-'60s. They're from a series that subsequently became called Body Beautiful. This is a work about also invisible labor. This is called After Hot House Harem After Angre. They're all smushy looking. And then I realized that I should be making agitprop. And I'll talk a little bit more about these later at base. They look terrible here, but I shouldn't be prideful. They were actually originally Xerox, photocopied in black and white and handed out on the street. And when they were published, so this is the original. I never showed the original. Here's where that came from. And this is what it looked like when, not when it was a flyer, when it was a single piece, but when it was published in an underground newspaper. And this one looks like that. And I'll just go to the end of these. That was, that's the First Lady, Pat Nixon, and Faye Dunaway from the movie Bonnie and Clyde in the Tondo above. Of course, a Playboy, one of the very few Asian women represented in Playboy at the time. And then we started another war, and I helped form the group called Artists Against the War, where we did a number of indoor and outdoor projects. We designed this poster for the Republican National Convention, insanely held in New York City, thanks to our neoliberal mayor. We did these giant banner drops in the in Washington, D.C., in the Hart office building for the senators of the U.S. And then I thought I needed to do some individual works, and I thought that the stupidest thing I could do was to go back to the work I had done in the 60s and 70s, as though nothing had changed in the interim, do the same kind of montage work, and people would say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and I'd say, right, and therefore we're repeating Vietnam in a desert country, and I didn't see why I should change my modus operandi. That's the president, and he hopes the future president, his brother Jeb Bush, with one of the two signature, man with one of the two signature injuries of this war, which is traumatic limb amputation. They're still mostly cut and paste, with a few digital transformations in some of them, but not most of them. The picture in the background is taken by Anya Niedringhaus, who recently was killed in a combat theater. It's of Marines pretending to be from in the movie Gladiators from Ben-Hur before they invaded Fallujah. This has a picture of the My Lai massacre from Vietnam in it. I have that phone. It's a Motorola Razr. It's, as I said, actually orange. And then again in 2008, I was asked to put work on the cover of a magazine called Modern Painters, and I asked for the dimensions of the magazine, and so I made this montage to fit their dimensions. I can't get the colors to match, but it's okay. And I couldn't stop with one, so I did a number of them. This is a diptych based on the couture of Jimmy Choo. And yes, it's off register. I like to keep the references. You can see the text from the picture, the back of the newspaper. So this is obviously about uniforms. And I'll just say that's the last work I'll show, I guess, which is a 3-meter high prosthetic leg with Gucci sandals on it, because it's a woman's prosthetic. And I'm going to stop because I've been talking far too long. But if you like, and we still have a minute, I'd love to have some conversation. So let's see what I'm skipping. Oh, yeah, screen point. Gentrification.